Even though Denver fell short in the second round for the second straight year, they were still right there on the doorstep of another NBA Finals run. They even held a 1-0 and a 2-1 series lead over the eventual champion Thunder in that series, which says so much about just how close they were. What makes it even crazier is that they managed to push that far with a bench unit that was statistically one of the worst we've ever seen, getting outscored by a ridiculous 31 points per 100 possessions. And that's exactly why this season feels so exciting, because the Nuggets have finally gone out and addressed that issue. And later in this video, we'll break down exactly how they've done it. Another major reason why Denver is going to be right there again in the conversation for the very best team in the NBA next season is because they still have the best player in the league, Nikola Jokic. Last season, Jokic put up yet another ridiculous campaign, finishing second in MVP voting while averaging 29.6 points, 12.7 rebounds, and 10.2 assists per game. Yep, he averaged a triple-double last season and somehow didn't win the MVP. And along with that, for good measure, he added 1.8 steals per game. But if you thought those numbers were already outrageous, it doesn't even stop there, because his shooting was equally as jaw-dropping. Jokic made 42% from downtown, which included 22 heaves from beyond half court, which he actually made 2 of, by the way. But when you strip those out, it's closer to a 50% shooting percentage from deep, which essentially makes him one of the very best shooters in the sport, if not the best. And then when he gets down low, he's just as lethal, breaking opponents down with a deep bag of hook shots, floaters, and fadeaway jumpers. He shot 63% on 2-pointers last season, which shows you just how impossible it is to defend him one-on-one. But the crazy thing is, his scoring ability isn't even his best attribute, because we all know what truly separates Jokic from everybody else: his playmaking. Last season, Jokic was quite literally Denver's entire offensive system. Since 2017, in fact, he's consistently been in the 90th percentile or higher for usage rate. And last season, that went all the way up to the 97th percentile at 30.4%, which means that pretty much everything the Nuggets were doing last season ran through him offensively. And while the critics love to throw around the stat padding narrative whenever they see him rack up these double-digit assist games, that really couldn't be further from the truth. His passes actually really matter, maybe more than anybody else in the sport. His teammates convert shots off of his assists more efficiently than anybody else in the NBA. And that isn't just some one-season fluke either. Last season, he was once again in the 100th percentile for assist percentage, and he's actually been there every single season since the 2018-19 season. It's just who he is, the best playmaker in the NBA. And when you zoom out and look at his on-court impact, it's almost laughable about just how much of a difference he makes. With Jokic on the court last season, Denver outscored opponents by 11.5 points per 100, good for the 94th percentile league-wide, and they posted an offensive rating of 128.3, which is absolutely absurd. But when he sat, the entire team collapsed. Their net rating dropped down to a minus 9.8 in the 15th percentile, and their offense cratered all the way down to just 106 points per 100 possessions, which put them in the 8th percentile across the NBA. Without Jokic, the Nuggets could not generate a quality look, managing an effective field goal percentage of just 52%, another bottom tier number at the 24th percentile league-wide. So when he's on the floor, they look almost unbeatable, and when he's not, they look like the worst team in the NBA. That's why Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA, because last season, he was the only reason Denver was even in the conversation of a contender to begin with. And it's also what makes this season so exciting, because if the Nuggets can find a way to stabilize things even a little bit in the minutes without him, they might just put together the best team in basketball. So what happens if you give this Denver Nuggets team the one thing they didn't have last season? a real bench. Well, I honestly think that's the piece that could push them into being the very best team in the NBA. Even if this year's bench group isn't elite and is just somewhere around the middle of the pack, that would still be miles ahead of where they were last season. Because what they had last season wasn't just bad, it was one of the worst bench lineups we've ever seen in NBA playoff history. So, even if this year's group ends up being merely competent or even slightly below average compared to the rest of the league, that would still make a massive difference. Why? Because more of the Joker's dominance would actually show up on the scoreboard instead of being erased the moment he sat down. And that kind of a swing makes Denver so much better. When you actually compare last season's bench to this season's, it's honestly night and day. A year ago, Denver basically had 5.5 guys they could trust in the playoffs. They were rolling out a second unit featuring Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, and Zeke Nagy. That's the group that had a net rating of -31 whenever Jokic wasn't on the floor. They just didn't have enough guys who could consistently knock down shots, hold their own defensively, and make the right pass. In fact, none of them could do all three of these things well enough to stick as a reliable playoff piece. But when you flip the script to this season, it is a very different story. Now, the Nuggets have multiple players. Bruce Brown is back in the mix, and while yes, he's been through an injury and bounced around to 3 different teams since that 2023 title run, I really believe he can settle back into Denver's system, find his rhythm again, and then give them a massive lift. His defense, good enough decision-making with the ball, and just enough shooting to keep defenses honest makes him the perfect bench piece. Tim Hardaway Jr. is another guy who comes with his ups and downs. When he's cold, he can look like a dead-set liability, but when that jumper is falling, he completely changes games. We saw just how impactful he can be when that shot's falling with the Pistons at the end of last season, as he genuinely was massive for the Pistons last year. Then there's Big Val, Jonas Valanciunas, who finally gives Jokic a competent backup big. Now, that might not sound too flashy, but it's massive because it means Denver can actually buy Jokic some rest during the regular season, saving his energy for when it all really matters in the playoffs. I'm also high on Peyton Watson's upside. Even if he can take a small step forward as a three-point shooter, his already impressive defensive tools, combined with his unreal athleticism, potentially used as a lob threat or a cutting option for Jokic, suddenly makes him a really intriguing piece. Put that all together, and this year's bench looks far stronger than what Denver had to lean on last season. But it's not just the bench that I believe got better. As I mentioned earlier, I also think the starting 5 took a step forward, with the addition of Cam Johnson in favor of Michael Porter Jr. And I think Cam is really going to surprise a lot of people. He's not just a shooter, he's a much cleaner fit alongside Jokic than most realize, because of his underrated athletic ability. He can actually be a legitimate backdoor cutting threat, he can leak out in transition and finish plays on the break, giving Jokic another moving target rather than just a spot-up shooter. Defensively, he's also better than Porter Jr., and he's got more off the dribble skill than people give him credit for too. In Brooklyn, he was constantly creating his own shot off multiple dribbles, showing flashes as a pretty good isolation scorer. Now, while he's not going to get those same looks in Denver's system, just imagine him coming off a Jokic screen and then taking a couple of dribbles to pull up in the mid-range, or to curl around and hit a 3. Suddenly, Denver has something that could really function as a secondary version of the Jamal Murray-Jokic pick and roll that's been destroying teams for years. And let's not forget about just how good the starters already were. Last season, the unit of Murray, Brown, Porter Jr., Gordon, and Jokic had an argument for the best starting 5 in the league, outscoring opponents by 12.8 points per 100 with an offensive rating of 127.9 points per 100. Defensively, they weren't great, allowing 115.2 per 100. But time and time again, we've seen this team step it up in the playoffs and make themselves good enough on on that end to at least give them a chance to win. They've done this by mixing in some zone looks and simply just locking in more than they do in the regular season. And even beyond the bench improvements and the Cam Johnson addition, I love the way this roster is rounded out, with their two-way defensive trio of Christian Braun, Aaron Gordon, and Bruce Brown. These guys can all clamp down on defense, knock down the three when they have to, cut hard without the ball, finish out in transition, and even handle the ball a little bit when needed. Those skills makes them the perfect kind of complementary guys to surround Nikola Jokic with. Unselfish, versatile, and completely trustworthy when the playoffs arrive. So, when you put all of this together, Denver isn't just running back the same group we've already seen succeed. They're giving their MVP, their all-time great offensive engine, a far better complementary bench, and a starting lineup that might actually be better than before. That's why I believe Denver has a real case to be the best team in the NBA next season. But it doesn't mean they don't have their own negatives. So now, let's flip it around and talk about the concerns I have for the Denver Nuggets heading into this season. And honestly, I feel like we're kind of nitpicking here, because I genuinely believe that this team is so good. But if I had to point out three areas that do concern me, it would first be the health, which is basically the same for every team, but their defensive issues and potential depth concerns are somewhat legitimate. Like I said, it is nitpicking, but they are areas still worth keeping your eye on. The health concern is pretty obvious. I mean, if Nikola Jokic went down, this team would be bust. But moving on to the second concern, it's the defensive side of the ball. For most of the Jokic era, the Nuggets have been somewhere between average and below average on the defensive side of the ball during the regular season. Now, to their credit, they do tend to get better once the playoffs roll around, tightening things up enough to get by. But there is always that risk that one year they won't be able to flip the switch and they'll get exposed for being too soft defensively. Even in the regular season, if they're giving up too many points too easily and too often, that could hurt their overall seeding, potentially putting them on the road in the first round. Still though, because of how powerful their offensive system is, likely to be top 3 in the league again, and the fact that they have the best player in the world running it, I don't believe this is going to be a massive concern, as I would pencil them in as a top 3 seed in the West. Now, my third and probably largest concern about the Denver Nuggets next season is their depth. Now yes, I just spent a lot of time talking about how much better their bench looks this season compared to last year, and while I do believe they improved, it still isn't as good as some of the other contenders around the league. Last season, they really only had 5.5 guys to lean on in the playoffs, and this year, I think that number moves closer to 7 or 8, which as I said, is an improvement, but it's still not on par with some of the deeper teams out there. When you go down the list, Tim Hardaway Jr. is a guy who I think can be trusted in a playoff rotation, but it is entirely dependent on whether or not he's knocking down that 3 ball at a good enough clip. If the jumper's falling, he's a real asset. If it's not, he's a liability. Bruce Brown, if he's able to get back to that springy, athletic version of himself that we saw during the 2023 title run, and if he's knocking down the threes at least a 34% clip, then he is absolutely a guy you can trust. But beyond that, the questions do start mounting. Peyton Watson has to become a better jump shooter, especially from 3, to really be trusted to be playable in a high leverage situation. Now, I believe he's definitely going to be getting playoff minutes regardless, just because of his incredible defensive skill set, but whether he truly becomes trustworthy depends entirely on that jumper, and actually his ability to finish at the basket as well. Jonas Valanciunas is another question mark. I actually don't see him as a reliable playoff piece because he's just too slow laterally, both in a pick and roll coverage and actually just getting up and down the court. He still might get some good run in the postseason, but I really doubt if you can get away with playing him for any more than 10 to 15 minutes a night without running the risk of him getting completely exposed and attacked. Then you've got Julian Strawther, and for him, it's all about improving defensively to keep himself on the floor. But beyond that, he also needs to take a step forward as a playmaker. Too often last season, he made poor decisions with the ball when he came in. And if he can just be steadier in that area, even without being a great defensive player, that would be his ticket to real playoff minutes. So yes, while Denver's bench is far better than it was this time last year, it still does not stack up with some of the other contenders in the league. But the thing is, it just doesn't have to. Their starting five is just that good. They don't need their bench to be the difference. They just need them to be solid. They need stability. They need a group who can simply hold the line, keeping opponents from going on runs and avoiding giving up the lead that Jokic and the starters had built. And here's the real window of opportunity, because if Denver's bench isn't just solid, but it's actually pretty good, that could change everything. Potential bench lineups with Jamal Murray and Cam Johnson out there, with maybe Jonas Valanciunas playing as an offensive hub with some handoffs, does have the potential to be pretty good. That will be the ultimate wild card for the Nuggets this season. If the bench can be good, or at the very least be good enough, then I believe Denver goes from being a contender to being the best team in the NBA. Another team that I think has a sneaky case for that title is the New York Knicks. And if you want to see exactly why, then you can check out this full breakdown video right now.